Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, good whatever time of day it is. Thank you for tuning in to Conversations with Dr. Don. Now, for your first-time viewers, Conversations with Dr. Don is an ongoing series of 1-hour standalone talk shows where I interview interesting people like most of you out there about who they are as unique, one-of-a-kind individuals and about whatever it is that we've decided to talk about. Now, my guest this evening is David Fidanki. David Fidanki, the Executive Director of the American Civil Liberties Union of Oregon. Now, David has been on the show a few times in the past, and every 2 or 3 years we're going to have him back on again to talk about what's going on that ACLU is particularly concerned about nowadays. And it's always a pleasure to have you back on again.
Well, it's great to be here.
Good. You just got off the highway traveling from across town, and are you relaxed or still kind of tense for the highway?
Oh, no, it's... Why would anyone be tense in Portland?
I was thinking about L.A. I was down there last week.
Yeah, well, it's not quite as bad yet in the Portland metro area as it is in California.
Yeah. There's
a reason we live here.
You betcha, you betcha.
There are lots of reasons.
Yeah. So you just got back from a gathering of people like yourself in Utah.
That's true. We had a meeting of all of the executive directors of ACLU affiliates from around the nation, and the board presidents of the ACLU affiliates, and also we had the national board president, Susan Herman, and the national executive director, Anthony Romero, were there as well. We were talking about both organizational issues and the implications of the coming election for civil liberties. We're a nonpartisan organization, so we don't support or oppose candidates, but obviously our elected leaders affect civil liberties and our constitutional rights and the Bill of Rights. So we were talking about emerging issues and both progress that's been made and progress that needs to be made.
Needs to be made. That's important nowadays, particularly. Yes. What with the election results in Wisconsin, where the governor recall failed. Yeah, but we're getting ahead of ourselves.
Yeah.
Let's talk about who you are personally for a bit, because there'll be some viewers who have not heard you talk about your personal life at all before.
Sure.
And your full name again is?
David Fidanki.
You're Fidanki, no middle name?
Well, middle initial J. But I don't use that very often.
Okay, yeah. That's like my middle initial is C for Christian. And I'm a humanist and an atheist and agnostic, so I don't use that very often either.
Yeah.
So, as you know, viewers, the show usually goes in 2 major segments. The first segment is, the Who Are You segment. Get a little idea who you are, personally, bio, so that the viewers can have an idea where you're coming from when you talk about the things that we're going to talk about.
Right.
And saying, when and where were you born?
I grew up in New York City. And a baby boomer. And I went to college in California and got my bachelor's degree in English literature. And it's not easy to make a living as an English major. I think Garrison Keillor is one of the few who's been able to manage it. But
I love Garrison Keillor.
Prairie Home Companion and other things. But I became interested in journalism. And, you know, the coming of age in the 1960s and early 70s, as I did, was a tumultuous time.
Oh, yes.
in the U.S. and elsewhere. the Vietnam War was at its height, and there were lots of other issues. So I was drawn towards being a journalist, and I liked working with film. In those days, we didn't have video. There was either live TV or film.
Yeah, yeah.
And I enjoyed working with film, and so I was able to go to UC Berkeley to get my master's in journalism. And that was a great program. I specialized in broadcast journalism at that time. And when I finished that program in 1974, I came up to the Northwest and was lucky to get a job fairly quickly doing radio news in Eugene.
Mm-hmm.
On what was at that time the pretty much the only FM rock station that also had news. And I was hired to do the evening newscast. It was a half-hour show, pretty much in 10-minute segments. First 10 minutes we did on the war in Southeast Asia, the second 10 minutes on the fallout from Watergate, because President Nixon had just resigned, but many of the trials were still upcoming. And then the last 10 minutes was state and local news. So I did that for about a year, and then got hired by one of the local TV stations in Eugene, the ABC affiliate, KZI, and I worked there for about a year and a half. Mm-hmm. But I could see that news was getting less and less interested in politics and hard news, and more interested in just developing ratings.
Even then, huh?
Oh yeah, even then. Mm. So I saw the writing on the wall, and so I got out of the news business at that point and went over to the other side and became a political operative. I worked at the Oregon legislature in 1977, and then went to work for our former congressman in Eugene, Jim Weaver, for about 4 years. And about the time I was getting ready to leave there, ACLU was opening an office in Eugene, and I applied for the job and got hired. So I started working for ACLU down in Eugene in 1982. And
what prompted you to decide to work for the ACLU?
Well, yeah, there were a number of things. You know, as somebody who had been involved in politics, and as someone who had been a journalist, and I joke that I'm a recovering journalist, because it's not.
I resemble that.
It's not something you ever get over.
Yes.
I think I've only made it to step 3 in the 12-step program for recovering journalists. But so, you know, I had a strong attachment to the First Amendment, both freedom of speech, freedom of association, and free press, obviously. But I had grown up in New York at the time when all public school students were required to recite the Regent's Prayer, which was the genesis of the case that eventually overturned school prayer in the U.S. Supreme Court in 1962, which was Engel versus Vitale. I didn't have anything to do with that case, but I remember being a first grader and thinking how odd it was that we started the day with a prayer. It didn't seem right to me. So I had the instincts of civil liberties, whether I got that from my parents, and I'm sure a lot of it came from my parents, because there weren't that many students that felt the same way I did at the time. I don't remember.
You're an oddball.
Yeah, I think I was a little bit.
I've always been, and I feel good about it.
But so I think I always tended to put myself in the shoes of other people and think about how they would feel about things. And I think that does come from our families. as we're growing up, that sense of empathy for other people. And my mother was involved in the civil rights movement in the 1950s and 60s. And she was at the March on Washington in 1963. And I remember being very proud that she was there and watching it on TV. So I had a lot of experiences as I was growing up that I didn't really think about that much. It was just part of who I was.
Sure.
That was very, very much of a piece with the issues that ACLU has worked on over the decades, and so I've felt very comfortable working for the ACLU. It's not that I agree with every position that ACLU has taken, although you'll never get it out of me. At least not as long as I'm on staff. But I think there's only two things that ACLU members have in common. One is the belief in the need for an organization to protect the Bill of Rights and hold the government accountable for constitutional violations, and the other is that we love to argue about what the Bill of Rights means. So, you could find 10 ACLU members and probably get 10 different opinions on new emerging issues that aren't obvious.
But they'd be on one end of the political continuum for the most part, wouldn't they?
Well, I would hope so, but not as much as it should be.
Okay.
We could use more conservatives that are true conservatives.
What does that mean anymore, conservative? The term is long lost its true meaning.
I think of people like Barry Goldwater. And I certainly didn't agree with all of Barry Goldwater's positions. But he was an early advocate for gay rights, for example, because he believed that equal protection under the law meant equal protection for everyone under the law, and that no group of people should be singled out for differential treatment under our laws, or certainly under our Constitution. So, I think of true conservatives, and what is more conservative than trying to make sure the government follows the Constitution?
Yes.
Now, we may argue about what particular provisions of the Constitution mean and whether they are locked in time from 1791 or 1787 when they were various portions of the Constitution were first drafted, or whether they're living, breathing embodiments of the principles. The principles. That the framers of the Constitution were trying to put down in black and white on paper or on parchment, as the case may be. And, I think personally, I think it's a little bit of both, because some provisions of the Constitution had a very specific meaning to the folks who had been through the American Revolution and the events leading up to that, and yet other provisions were really intended, I think, to take on a different meaning over time. Sure. And we can talk about some of those in more detail as we move through the hour. Okay. So that's a little bit about me. I've been on the staff of the ACLU of Oregon since 1982. And I became the executive director when my predecessor retired. Mm-hmm. I took over from Stevie Remington, who was our first executive director, and she was executive director from 1970 through the end of 1992, and I took over in January of 1993. So I'm now in my 20th year as executive director. Next January will be my 20th anniversary as executive director. But I've been on the ACLU staff for more than 30 years.
Oh, wonderful.
I'm still trying to figure out what I'm going to do when I grow up.
don't ever grow up.
But
yes, people with that kind of dedication are rare.
It's been a great job to have for me. Every day is different. You learn something new every day. And that was part of what drew me to journalism originally, was that, you know, if I didn't know what was going on, I knew how to find the person who did and talk to them about it and share that knowledge with others. So you know, there's a part of me that's drawn to learning and helping to make complicated issues understandable to the public, because when it comes to freedom, if the public doesn't support freedom, we're not going to have it. If the public doesn't understand what their freedoms are, we won't have them for long. So there is an important part of my job that involves, and an important part of what the American Civil Liberties Union does, is trying to speak to people where they are in their lives and why our fundamental freedoms are so important to protect and expand in some cases. Because, you know, the United States government is a work in progress. I think the framers of the Constitution, and certainly those who took part in the Revolution back in the 1700s, understood that it was an experiment. They were trying to create a form of government that would preserve freedom, but also preserve the ability of people to go about their daily lives. And you know, the pursuit of happiness isn't in the Constitution. That was life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That was the Declaration of Independence. Mm-hmm. They didn't put the pursuit of happiness in the Constitution. They dropped that one by the wayside. But I think that was still very important to them.
Yeah. Let me see if I've got a few more questions here that I can't ignore my format, you know.
Sure.
And is there anything significant worth mentioning about your cultural heritage, or are you just plain old American white bread? You look American white bread to me. You're not from the Middle East or anything, are you?
Not that I know of. My background on my father's side, he immigrated to the U.S. from Panama.
From Panama?
From Panama. That side of my family were originally Jews from Spain. And a little thing called the Inquisition happened in 1492. And most of my family left Spain at that time, and that started a long journey, first to Portugal and then to Germany and then to the Netherlands, and eventually to the Caribbean, Curacao in the late 1600s, and then St. Thomas in the 1700s. And Panama, my family got to Panama in 1871. Mm-hmm. So I'm Hispanic, but you'd never know it from looking at me.
I knew there was some. This is even deeper than the last time you told me this.
My father was fluent in Spanish, but never spoke Spanish at home. Mm-hmm. So I had to take Spanish in school, and my Spanish is not very good.
Okay. And we talked about your education. You have a partner, a wife, a husband, a boyfriend, a girlfriend, or something, or what?
I've been married to my wife for, let's see, this is going to be our 39th anniversary next month. We have two sons who both live in California, mm-hmm. And very proud of them.
Are they following Dad's footsteps?
Not exactly,
okay.
but that would be boring.
Right.
You know, kids have to mix it up.
Yeah, I have 5 daughters, and you wouldn't believe they're from the same parents.
Well, that's fairly true of our sons too, but you know, they have a lot in common.
Yeah, okay. Memberships. I shouldn't be asking you this because your position
other than the
ACLU.
ACLU?
Yeah.
I'm not a joining kind of guy, generally.
You don't have time to join anything.
You know, I have lots of things I like to do in my own time.
Mm-hmm. Like what?
Well, I'll be attending the Olympic trials in Eugene.
Oh.
I love track and field.
Mm-hmm.
And also love hiking and getting into the outdoors, which here in Oregon there's lots of places to go.
Oh yeah.
And I love to travel.
Okay. Yeah. Heroes or people you admire
other than
look
yours?
up to.
You have some very good ones.
From past history or alive today. Any names come to mind? People that you particularly respect or look up to, male or female?
Well, you know, I have great admiration for Martin Luther King Jr.
Why?
Creating change through nonviolent action and through the political process. I think he was not only an amazing writer and orator, but also an incredible political strategist. He was a very unusual person, and I think still has a lot to teach us. And so, you know, other than Dr. King, I think another person I think about, and I could talk about ACLU people, Roger Baldwin and Crystal Eastman and others of the founders of ACLU.
Sure.
But I think Margaret Sanger is a hero of mine,
Mm-hmm.
who was the founder of Planned Parenthood.
Yeah.
And was, you know, a lot of people don't realize that she was arrested for obscenity in New York for passing out pamphlets about birth control.
I think I remember that.
You know, there are lots of heroes. I think there are all kinds of people we have a lot to learn from. But I think it's important to understand that even if you think about somebody as a hero, they were a human being. And one person can make a difference. One person can make a big difference, but not by themselves. They have to join with others. And so I think one of the skills that I think is very important is being able to listen to other people that you want to work with and to learn from them and to find ways to move together in towards common goals, even though you may disagree on many things. And that's the essence of working in coalition that you so often have to do if you want to accomplish anything.
So those people that you look up to or admire, as I put it, they had maybe 2 or 3 qualities about them that they shared. I'm guessing one of them is the capacity for empathy.
Yes.
And being able to listen. Not with just the ears, but with the whole sense, the whole being.
Right.
And what other qualities do you think that those people might have in common that warrant your admiration or looking up to?
I think, you know, when I think of people who have been involved in the political process, not necessarily, you know, some of them have been elected officials, others have been, you know, social activists or others who were trying to accomplish something. The ones that I admire are the ones who have a vision of where we need to go. Excuse me while I cough. They have a vision of where we need to go and the steps we need to take to get there. I think many people get turned off by the political process because so many times they may They may see a goal that needs to be achieved, but they don't know how to get there. And the politicians might say, well, we can't do that. It's just not possible. And I think the people who get things done understand how to achieve lasting change incrementally. You can't always do it all at once, but you can move down the field. You can move. You can make the field larger, and help people see that there is a bigger, a place we could get to that maybe they hadn't even thought was possible. But we can't get there all at once. But we always need to be making progress towards that vision. And the vision changes over time. I mean, look at the United States. When our country was founded, you had to be a white man that owned property to be able to vote, yeah, or to serve in elected office. You know, we had to fight a civil war before we could get rid of slavery. And even after we got rid of slavery, we had to pass the 13th, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, yes, to the Constitution to make sure that every person born in the United States could vote and could have equal protection under the law. And we're still fighting to achieve that goal. And it's been in our Constitution for more than 140 years, and yet we still haven't achieved that goal.
Isn't there something rewarding in the working toward that goal? That I'm restless deep in my core personally. That's why I've been a member of the ACLU for 40,000 years, it seems to me. And a few other organizations that I won't mention now, they have the same sort of an idea. There's no such thing as impossible, it can't be done. And you told me that, it makes me redouble my effort to show you that it can be done, and it will be done, perhaps not in my lifetime, but for those that follow me, like I'm following in King and Gandhi's.
But yeah, at the same time, you know, that provision in the Constitution that provides that everyone who has been born in the United States is a citizen in the United States is under attack today. There are people in Congress and out of Congress who want to take away that birthright from Americans who are born of immigrant parents. And that, you know, would have been inconceivable, you know, just 15 or 20 years ago, that we would even be having to debate that issue in the 21st century. But that's true with so many of our freedoms. Every generation has to relearn the lessons of history and freedom, and to make it relevant to themselves, or else it can be lost. And you know, we don't have to look too far around the world to see how important freedom is to people. With the events of the Arab Spring and elsewhere over the last few years, people have been going into the streets to exercise their freedoms and to say that they want government that will value those freedoms. And yet they don't come from the kind of, they don't have the legacy that we have of our Constitution and our Bill of Rights. They are trying to create those legacies. And I would hope that Americans would understand that we have to jealously guard those legacies and make them living, breathing in every generation if we want to keep them.
With that, we're going to stop now and take a break and come back. Can we take a break there in the control room, please? Okay, we are back. We've been jotting down some notes to be prepared for the second half of the show. And I tell you, before we start, I'm all excited again. So, for you viewers who missed the opening of the show because you were simply channel surfing or whatever, Conversations with Dr. Don is an ongoing series of one-hour standalone talk shows where I interview interesting guests like David Fidunke here about who he is and what he's interested in as his position as the executive director of the Oregon American Civil Liberties Union and his years of service with them and a whole bunch of other stuff. And we've had a good time so far just talking about who you are in the first half of the show. So we'll be a little more freewheeling, and we have an idea what else we'll talk about in the second half. And if you have some other ideas besides what we talked about, carry on and I'll follow you.
Great.
Let's start with my basic fundamental questions. For some people who are not quite as sophisticated as those who know about the depth and about the ACLU, those kinds of things. My question is, what is the ACLU?
It's a nonprofit organization. We're a membership organization, so people can join. You don't have to be a lawyer to join the ACLU. I'm not a lawyer, so why should any of you be lawyers? We, of course, welcome lawyers because we do a lot of work in the courts. Here in Oregon, virtually all of that work is done by volunteer attorneys. We do have a legal director on our staff who's an attorney, and he gets involved in some of those cases. But we don't get money from the government, at least not voluntarily. Occasionally we win a case in court and get attorney fees from the government. Most of our all of our funding really comes from individuals who are members and either pay membership dues or make contributions above and beyond dues. So our main organization is a 501c4 advocacy organization, nonprofit. We also have a foundation people can make tax-deductible contributions to that does our legal work and our educational work.
Don't you have any corporations funding the ACLU?
There are a few folks in business who make contributions, but not per se, no.
Okay. What are civil liberties?
That's a great question, and when you know the answer to that, let me know. When we say civil liberties, we're generally referring to constitutional rights, particularly the rights in the Bill of Rights.
Bill of Rights.
Freedom of speech, religious freedom, freedom of assembly, due process under law, the right to trial by jury, lots of different things.
Yes.
We're also talking about, the Bill of Rights, we generally think of the first 10 amendments to the Constitution. But there are other parts of the Constitution we like a lot too, like equal protection under the law under the 14th Amendment, the right to vote for women, the 19th Amendment. So there's, abolition of slavery, and there are lots of things in the Constitution that we feel are civil liberties, but not all civil liberties are protected by the Constitution.
Really, no?
For example, the Constitution only protects us against the government. And we felt before my time with the ACLU that it was very important to provide protection for civil rights in private employment. The Federal Civil Rights Act, the Oregon Civil Rights Act. We had to pass laws to protect civil liberties, sometimes that are not protected by the Constitution. So,
go ahead.
For example, right now we're trying to provide greater protection for people's privacy. The Constitution doesn't have a specific privacy protection. The closest we have is the Fourth Amendment, which prohibits the government from, searching our houses or our things or ourselves without probable cause and without a warrant. That's been diluted quite a bit. I won't get into the details of that, but it doesn't provide us protection against snooping by private corporations or corporations amassing large amounts of data about us. Or it doesn't prevent, at least the federal government, from getting access to records about us from third parties like banks or internet service providers or telephone companies. There is a law on the books, the Electronic Privacy Act, the Electronic Communications Privacy Act.
Mm-hmm.
Take a guess when that was passed by Congress.
I won't. You tell me.
Oh, just take a wild guess, Don. Come on, be courageous. What year do you think that would have been passed?
Just a couple years ago.
1987.
87.
It hasn't been changed since. A few things have happened since 1987.
So the Constitution,
the rise of cellular telephones,
and the Bill of Rights,
not to mention, not to mention smartphones.
Yeah.
The internet, little thing called the internet, didn't exist in 1987. So we've been organizing to get that law updated. So not all civil liberties are protected by the Constitution, and not everything in the Constitution is a civil liberties either.
So do we need to expand the coverage of the Constitution to cover those kinds of things you just talked about? Another amendment?
Well, I'm not saying we don't, but it's pretty hard to pass a constitutional amendment. So we try to focus on getting better policies and better laws to provide those protections.
Is there such a thing as an uncivil liberty?
Well, one of our civil liberties, one of our constitutional rights, is to be offensive. The First Amendment guarantees speech, protects speech that a majority of Americans would find offensive or even antithetical to freedom.
Yes.
We believe, and our framers believe, we think, that it's very important that all speech be permissible in this country and to let the people decide what the best ideas are, rather than having the government censor expression or prohibit speech. And in Oregon, we have very strong protection of expression. The Oregon Bill of Rights provides that no law shall be passed restraining the free expression of opinion or the right to speak, write, or print freely on any subject whatever. On any subject whatever.
Isn't that dangerous? That kind of freedom?
Well, you know, speech can be very dangerous to those who are in power. And if it weren't, we wouldn't have the United States of America.
Right. Okay. Which civil liberties are being threatened today? Which ones seem to be more threatened nowadays?
You know, when the attacks of September 11th, 2001 occurred, we knew that we were entering a time of crisis, and freedom is always in jeopardy in a time of national crisis. We expected that the dangers would come in the form of people being singled out for suspicion or for enforcement. And indeed, we have seen Muslims being singled out, both for enforcement and prosecution, in the wake of 9/11. What we didn't expect as much were some of the challenges to our very foundations of government, the balance of power between the three branches of government. That's a fundamental safeguard. We didn't expect that the Bush administration would try to take unto itself the powers of the legislative branch and the judiciary, that it would maintain that it had unilateral power to impinge on freedoms that we all hold dear without any accountability to Congress or the courts. And unfortunately, some of those policies have continued under the current Obama administration. And we're very concerned that in the area of national security, that some of the policies that were first put in place by the Bush administration, some of which have been expanded by the Obama administration, may become the new normal as we move forward.
The new normal.
And that's very dangerous. So let me give you an example.
Please.
The Bush administration created the no-fly list. But it was the Obama administration that greatly expanded the no-fly list after the Christmas incident a couple of years ago, the failed underwear bomber on a plane that was flying to Detroit. So we are, this system of putting people on a secret list and refusing to tell them that they're on the list without telling that, even if they happen to discover they're on the list, still not confirming they're on the list.
How is it violating their civil rights to be on this list?
Under the Constitution, under the Fifth Amendment, every person has a right to due process. They cannot be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. One of our liberties is the right to travel from place to place.
Sure.
Both in this country and out of this country. And the no-fly list is, so it's the no-fly, if you can't get on an airplane, particularly if you happen to be overseas and you can't get on an airplane to go home to the United States, as a number of our clients were, that's a very direct impingement on your liberty. The Fifth Amendment says you have a right to due process. And that right to due process means you have a right to be notified that your liberty is being cut back. You have a right to know why the government has taken that action. And you have the right to a hearing before a neutral third party.
None of these things are going on now.
No, they're not.
What needs to be done?
Well, we have a court case that was filed here in Portland by the National ACLU and the ACLU of Oregon and a few other affiliates. We have 15 clients, and
15.
that case is currently on appeal. We lost. We're basically arguing that the Fifth Amendment applies to our government, that there is no exception. The government is saying, well, there may be a right to due process, but they're providing due process. Let me tell you what they're providing. The government says, if you can't get on an airplane, file a grievance with the Transportation Security Administration, the TSA. The TSA enforces the no-fly list. They tell the airlines whether someone is on the list or not. But the TSA doesn't create the list. They have no control over the list. The FBI and the Terrorist Screening Center, which is controlled by the FBI, is in control of that. But there is no process to go directly to the FBI. The process there is to file a grievance on the TSA website, Transportation Security Administration, and they tell you, thank you for your grievance form. We will consider it. A few months later, 6, 9 months later, you get a response from the TSA. Thank you again for filing your grievance. It has been considered. That's it. They don't confirm or deny that you were ever on the list. They don't tell you whether you're still on the list. They don't give you access to any information about why you were put on the list, if you were. And we're saying that violates the Fifth Amendment. That's not due process. And we will find out if we can pursue that case when the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, U.S. Court of Appeals, rules in our case. It was argued last month here in Portland and before a 3-judge panel. And we're going to find out if that case can even go forward. So in the meantime, the list has been greatly expanded. Mm-hmm. The only way you find out is to buy an airplane ticket and try to get on a plane. And if the airline tells you you can't fly because you're on the no-fly list, you have to file a grievance. And then, according to the government, you have to buy another airplane ticket after you hear about the grievance to find out if you're still on the list. We don't think that's fair. We don't think it's constitutional.
So do you think you're going to have to escalate to the next level of judicial review?
Well, that's what we have done, and I expect the case will be appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court if we win by the government. We'll certainly appeal it if we lose, I think. We may file another suit somewhere else. But it's really, you know, it's un-American. It's not consistent with the ideals that America is supposed to be living by. And more we have a secret government when it comes to national security matters, where there is, you know, people are basically at the mercy of some government bureaucrat they will never even meet to decide whether or not they're going to be allowed their freedom.
And if this gets to the Supreme Court, how do you suppose that the Supreme Court will rule?
Well, frankly, I hope it doesn't go there. Frankly, I hope that we win and the government, that we win in the Ninth Circuit and the government allows us to go forward in the trial court to get a ruling. That's what the government should do, because we're just talking about fundamental freedoms here that are not going to jeopardize national security.
And your point of view. All right. School to prison pipeline. You jotted a note here that must be sort of important for the ACLU. What does that mean, school to prison pipeline?
What we have today in our country is not just an achievement gap by many students, but we're seeing disproportionate discipline against students of color, particularly African American students, Latino students, and Pacific Islander, Hawaii Native students, and Native American students. Mm-hmm. They are much more likely to be expelled or suspended from school than white students for the very same conduct. And that makes it more difficult for those students to learn their education and achieve. And if they don't achieve, they're more likely to get in trouble with the law, get pulled into juvenile court, to juvenile detention, and then eventually into the prison. So we have a school-to-prison pipeline in this country that the ACLU is working with our coalition partners to try to intercept at the earliest stages in elementary school, middle school, and high school, because it's much more cost-effective and much more just to make sure that everyone is treated equally, and to make sure that everyone gets the skills they need to be successful citizens in our country.
How will you intercept or intervene in this, pipeline? How do you intervene?
We're starting by publicizing the data, the actual numbers of what's happening out there, which has been hidden from the public. Yeah. And we're pleased that State Superintendent of Public Instruction Susan Castillo here in Oregon has agreed and now is available, the discipline data district by district and here in Oregon, so broken out by race and ethnicity, so that parents and families can see what's happening in their school district and compare it to what's happening around the state. And we think there ought to be similar tools, and that's on a website that the State Department of Education has here in Oregon. And folks can go to our website to find that address. We have a link on our website. So we think that this differential treatment, eliminating that differential treatment between students of color and white students, needs to be a priority. And Governor Kitzhaber is making it a priority in his education reform efforts here in Oregon. The proof is in the pudding, and we're going to be working to make sure that that's successful with our coalition partners.
Hasn't there been a strategy in the electoral process, at least on the national level, to have a southern strategy, so to speak, across the country in terms of looking at people, like you mentioned, people of color and others, lower class people,
and I think
as
what we're
not full
seeing,
citizens in their behavior and the way they're treated, the government's not going to respond positively to information regarding the school to prison pipeline. We need to change the government, don't we?
well, it's a funny thing. Budgets are tight in government. Prisons are very expensive. And it's much cheaper to educate a child than it is to put them in prison.
Well, if you have a higher priority, if it's more important to have those people looked down on rather than educate them.
You know, I just don't believe that even the most cynical of our politicians
The evidence shows
really
that this is how
believe
it's been for many years now.
There's no question. There is scapegoating of immigrants. There is scapegoating of criminals. There is scapegoating of all kinds of people by some politicians.
Yes.
You know, as a person who works for a nonpartisan organization, I can tell you that there have been people of all political stripes who have been guilty of that.
Yes.
Kind of scapegoating and you know, trying to inflame the emotions of people in order to get votes. And that's reprehensible. But there are things we all have in common, and there is common ground that we can work towards that will move these issues forward. And I know that there are Republicans who agree with us on these issues, who want to see more effective education. They just don't want to have to pay 3 times as much to get there.
We need another hour. Okay, we've got about 2 minutes to close, you and I, but
Sure.
you're so interesting to talk with. And what do you have to say to our viewers that would be of use to them in keeping America free, and whatever else comes to mind for you?
Well, if
Tell them.
If you want to know what your rights are,
Mm-hmm.
we have we have brochures and items on our website, both nationally and in Oregon, that will tell you what your rights are. Whether you're a student or an adult, whether you are driving or walking, whether you're an immigrant or a citizen. And we have those available in different languages for people who are immigrants and aren't as comfortable with their English as they are with other languages. So that's one thing that I think everyone can use.
And they should make an effort to learn what you're talking about.
Yes, well, www.aclu.org.
www.aclu.org. I've been a member for 30 years or more, I think, and I'm going to be a member for 30 more years.
I sure hope so.
Thanks again for coming on.
Thanks for having me. It's
so
always
much.
a pleasure.
Yeah. So it's time to close, and I got to get ready to say goodnight. I like saying goodnight. I'd like to say hello first, though. Keep those pens and pencils handy, because you may want to jot down something that will show you in the closing credits. Okay, to get the Dr. Don local broadcast schedule, go to www.donbaham.com to get my local broadcast schedule and click on present day activities. Another PSA, public service announcement. This came up too fast. What's my next one up there, please? Hello. Control room. Hello. To learn more about the ACLU, we'll tell you again, go to www.aclu.org, and there's a phone number, 212, area code 549-2500. We have another PSA for you to get my shows broadcast by other stations. Ask your local public access station where you're watching this in other parts of the country to go to www.pegmedia.org, and they will tell you how to get those shows and broadcast them from other cities in the country. And another one, to end corporate personhood, we've got to end corporate personhood now. Go to www.movetoamend.org. We've got to amend the Constitution. Oh boy, I got to say thanks for watching. And remember KFC. KFC is so important. Not Kentucky Fried Chicken. Dr. Don's KFC. Kind, friendly, and charitable. Be kind, be friendly, and be charitable to you. And you, and you. Thanks again for watching. good night, good afternoon, good morning, whatever. Bye-bye.